Every story leaves something behind. A whisper, a shadow, a question that was never answered. Here, we dig through the forgotten files, the unsolved mysteries, the chilling true crimes, and the horrors people wish had stayed buried. From haunted legends to real-life nightmares, every tale is pulled straight from the horror archives. So turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and step carefully, because once a story enters the horror archives, it never truly leaves.
Lake houses are supposed to be peaceful, quiet water, open sky, nothing to worry about. But isolation has a way of revealing things you weren't meant to see. And some lakes hold more than just water. These are 5 true lake house horror stories. This first story was sent in by a listener who inherited his grandfather's property. He calls it the dark that faced the wrong way. It's a slow one, but the detail that stays with you is how something impossibly heavy moved without making a sound. The first morning I woke up at the lake house, the dark was pointing east. I know that because I watched the sunrise from the kitchen window, and the dark stretched out directly toward it, cutting the orange reflection in half. It was my grandfather's place. He'd passed in February and left it to me. I hadn't been there since I was maybe 11 or 12, but the bones of the place were the same. Cedar walls, low ceilings, the smell of lake water baked into every surface. The dark was original. My grandfather built it himself in the 80s. Pressure-treated pine, bolted into the rock shelf that jutted out from the shore. It didn't float. It didn't move. It was fixed into the earth. So when I came down the second morning and the dark was pointing southeast, I told myself I was just disoriented. I hadn't paid close enough attention. I poured my coffee and sat on the porch and watched the mist lift off the water and didn't think about it again. On the third morning, it was pointing south. I stood at the kitchen window for a long time. The sunrise was to my left now, and the dark reached out toward the tree line on the opposite shore. I walked down to it. The boards were the same. The bolts were the same. There were no drag marks, no sign that anything had been altered. But I could see the old position. There were scrape marks on the rock shelf where the supports used to sit. Exposed stone, lighter in color where it had been covered for decades. Something had moved a fixed wooden dock silently overnight and reset it in a new position. I called my uncle. He told me the dock had always faced south. I described the scrape marks, the original bolt holes still visible in the rock. He got quiet and said he didn't know what to tell me. I stayed one more night. I told myself I'd watch. I set an alarm for every hour. At 1 a.m. I checked. The dark was facing south. At 2 a.m. south. At 3 a.m. I looked out the window and I couldn't see the dark at all. The moon was bright enough. The water was still, but where the dark should have been, there was just the flat rock shelf and open water. I put on my shoes and walked down to the shore with a flashlight. The dark was behind the house, not on water, not connected to anything. It was sitting in the grass clearing behind the house, all 12 feet of it, laid perfectly flat, as if someone had carried it and set it down gently. The bolts were still attached to the crossbeams. They hadn't been unscrewed. They'd been pulled through the rock, clean, like the stone had just let go. I left that morning. When I came back 2 weeks later with a contractor to assess the property, the dark was back in the water, facing north this time. The contractor didn't find anything unusual. He said the dark looked like it had been there for 30 years. I sold the property that summer. I never asked the new owners about the dark. I think I already know what they'd tell me. Some stories get under your skin not because of what you see, but because of what you can't explain. This next one is from a couple who rented a cabin in northern Wisconsin during the off-season. They call it the Canoe on the roof. There was a canoe on the roof of the lake house when we arrived, and my wife asked me if that was normal. It wasn't. The rental listing showed a canoe rack by the water, 2 aluminum canoes side by side. But when we pulled up the gravel drive, one of them was sitting on the peak of the roof, balanced perfectly along the ridge line like it had been placed there with a crane. We were in northern Wisconsin, about 40 minutes from the nearest town. The house sat alone on a small lake with no other cabins visible from the shore. It was late September and the trees were already thinning out. I called the property manager. She said she'd send someone to check, but it might be a few days. Kids from the area sometimes messed with the rentals in the off-season. She didn't sound concerned. The second canoe was still on the rack, so we used that one. The lake was quiet. Glass-still water, no boats, no sounds except loons in the distance. We fished for a few hours and came back and grilled dinner on the deck. That night, I heard something on the roof. Not footsteps, more like something heavy being dragged very slowly across the shingles. A long, low scraping sound that moved from one end of the house to the other. It lasted about 5 minutes. Then it stopped. In the morning, the canoe was gone from the roof. I assumed the wind had knocked it off, but when I walked the perimeter, it wasn't on the ground. It wasn't anywhere. I checked the wreck. Only one canoe. I checked the shoreline, thinking it might have rolled into the water. Nothing. I told my wife and she laughed it off, said the property manager probably sent someone in the night. That second evening, we were sitting on the deck after dark. The lake was perfectly calm, and then about 200 feet out, I saw the missing canoe. It was floating in the middle of the lake. There was someone sitting in it. I could only see the silhouette. They weren't paddling. They weren't moving. Just sitting, facing the house. My wife saw it too. She went inside for binoculars, but by the time she came back, the canoe had drifted further out. Through the binoculars, she said she couldn't make out any detail. Just a dark shape. We watched for maybe 10 minutes, and then the shape was gone. The canoe was still there, but empty. No splash, no sound. Whoever had been sitting in it just wasn't there anymore. We didn't sleep well. I pushed a dresser against the bedroom door, which felt ridiculous but also necessary. At around 4 a.m., I heard the dragging sound again. On the roof, slow, deliberate, directly above our bed. It went on for almost 20 minutes this time. In the morning, the canoe was back on the roof. Both canoes were on the roof, side by side, balanced along the ridge line, and there were muddy handprints on the siding beneath our bedroom window. They were too high up. The window was on the second floor, at least 15 feet off the ground. There was nothing to climb. We packed and left within the hour. I called the property manager from the road and told her what happened. She was quiet for a long time and then said we weren't the first guests to mention the canoes. She offered us a full refund. I took it, but what I really wanted was an explanation. I never got one. All right, this next one is heavier than the others. I want to warn you that it involves a real discovery and an ongoing case. The person who sent this in asked me to keep certain details vague, and I've respected that. He calls it the fish cleaning station. I need to be careful with how I tell this because there's an active investigation, and I was asked not to share details publicly. But it's been 3 years now and nothing has come of it, so I think people should know. My friends and I rented a lake house in the Ozarks for a long weekend. 4 of us. The house was older but well maintained, set back from the water on a wooded lot. There was a fish cleaning station near the dock, concrete slabbed stainless steel table, a hose hookup, and a drain that fed into a gravel pit. Standard setup for a fishing property. On the first day, we noticed the table had stains on it. Dark, almost black in places. We figured it was old fish blood. The surface was scratched up and worn, like it had seen decades of use. We cleaned a few base on it that afternoon and thought nothing of it. That night, Kyle went down to rinse off the table and came back looking pale. He said the drain was clogged, and when he pulled the grate off, he found hair. A lot of it. Long, dark hair, matted and tangled in the drain pipe. We joked about it, said some woman probably washed her hair in the lake and it drifted in. But the drain didn't connect to the lake. It fed into a gravel pit behind the station, away from the water. The next morning I went down to fish and noticed something else. There were grooves on the underside of the steel table. I only saw them because I dropped a lure and bent down to pick it up. The grooves were scratches, dozens of them clustered in parallel lines, gouged into the underside of the metal, like someone had been gripping the table from below and dragging their fingers across it. I showed the others. We all got quiet. Tyler made a joke about it being a murder table, and nobody laughed. We decided to check the gravel pit. We walked around behind the station and found it. It was maybe 4 feet square, filled with gray gravel, but the gravel in the center was darker. I pushed some of it aside with my foot and found fabric. A piece of cloth buried a few inches down. It was part of a shirt. Floral pattern small like a woman's blouse. It was stiff and discolored. Tyler pulled out his phone and called the county sheriff. They came out that afternoon. 2 deputies. They were polite but clearly didn't expect to find anything. Then one of them started moving the gravel with a rake and he stopped talking. They asked us to go back to the house. We sat on the porch and watched 3 more vehicles arrive over the next 2 hours. A van from the state crime lab showed up before dark. They blocked off the entire area around the fish cleaning station with tape. A deputy came to take our statements. He asked how long we'd been there, whether we'd moved anything, whether we'd seen anyone else on the property. He wouldn't tell us what they found. We were asked to leave that night. They put us up in a motel in town and told us not to discuss the specifics of what was in the gravel pit. I can tell you that the property was seized. The owner, an older man who lived 2 counties over, was brought in for questioning. The listing was removed. I checked the county court records every few months for a while. There was a forensic report filed, but it was sealed. No charges have been made public. I don't know what they found under the gravel, but I know the scratches on the underside of that table weren't from fish, and I know the hair in the drain wasn't from washing up in the lake. I still think about the blouse, the floral pattern, how small it was. This next story, I went back and forth on whether to include it, not because it's unbelievable, but because of how calculated the threat was. The person who sent it in is a father. He calls it the man across the lake. My family has owned a lake house in East Texas since the 90s. It's on a private reservoir, maybe half a mile across. The opposite shore is mostly undeveloped, just trees and brush, no roads, no structures. Or at least there weren't any. In the summer of 2019, I started noticing someone standing on the far shore. I'd see them in the early morning when the light was flat and the water was calm. Just a figure standing at the tree line facing our house. I assumed it was a hunter or a hiker who'd wandered onto the wrong property. But they were there the next morning too. And the next, same spot, same posture, just standing. I got my spotting scope out. At that distance, even with magnification, the detail was limited. It appeared to be a man tall, wearing dark clothing. He wasn't holding anything. He wasn't moving, just standing and facing directly at our house. After a week of this, I took the boat across. It was about a 15-minute ride. As I approached the far shore, I couldn't see anyone. I beached the boat and walked into the tree line. The ground was soft and I found impressions, boot prints, deep ones, like someone had been standing in the same spot for a long time. There were dozens of them, overlapping, all in the same small area. Some were partially filled with rainwater, meaning they'd been there through multiple weather cycles. This person had been coming to that spot for weeks, maybe longer, before I ever noticed them. I also found something hanging from a low branch. It was a pair of binoculars, not dropped, hung by the strap deliberately at eye level, angled toward our house. I didn't touch them. I went home and called the sheriff. A deputy came out, took a report, and said they'd patrol the area when they could. The next morning, the figure was back. Same spot. I could see him through the scope, but now he appeared to be holding something up. Something rectangular, flat. I adjusted the focus. It was a photograph. He was holding a photograph facing our house. I couldn't make out what was in the image, but the white border was visible. He held it up for about an hour. Then he turned and walked into the trees. I went across again that afternoon. The binoculars were gone, but in their place, pinned to the same branch with a nail, was a photograph. It was a picture of my daughter's bedroom window, taken from inside our house. I felt something drop in my chest. The photo was recent. Her curtains were the ones we'd hung that spring. The angle was from inside the room, looking at the window from maybe 5 feet away. Someone had been in our house, in her room. I pulled the photo down and drove straight to the sheriff's office. They took it seriously this time, sent a forensic team to the house. They found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints that didn't belong, but they did find something we hadn't noticed. The lock on the basement door had been replaced. Not broken, replaced. A new lock, same brand, same color, but with a different key. Someone had installed their own lock on our basement door so they could come and go. We had the locks changed on every door and window that day. We installed cameras. We never saw the figure on the far shore again, but the cameras picked up something 2 weeks later that I still haven't fully processed. At 3:14 a.m., one of the basement cameras recorded the new lock on the basement door turning, unlocking from the outside. The door opened about 3 inches, then stopped. It stayed open for 11 minutes. Then it slowly closed and the lock turned again. The key we'd been given for that lock was in my bedside drawer. Whoever opened that door had a copy. I don't know when they made it. We don't use the lake house anymore. My daughter doesn't know why. This last story is the one that kept me up at night when I first read it. It's from someone who rented a lake house alone in the Adirondacks. He calls it the water was warmer there. I'll let him tell it. This happened to me last August at a lake house I rented alone in the Adirondacks. I want to say up front that I reported this to the state police and they told me there was nothing to investigate. I disagree. The house was small, just one bedroom, perched on a steep wooded lot that dropped down to the lake. The water was cold, even in summer. Spring-fed, the listing said. Deep and clear, with a rocky bottom you could see 15 or 20 feet down. The first few days were fine. I swam in the mornings, worked remotely during the day, and sat on the dock at night. The lake was isolated. No motorboats, no other docks visible. On the fourth morning, I was swimming about 50 yards from shore, and I hit a warm patch. It was abrupt, like stepping from a cold room into a warm one. A column of warm water, maybe 10 feet across, rising from below. I treaded water for a moment and looked down. The water below me was darker. Not murky, just deep. Too deep to see the bottom in that spot. The warmth felt biological, not like a thermal vent. Like body heat diffused through water. I swam back to shore and tried not to think about it. That night I was on the dock and I heard something in the water. A rhythmic sound like breathing but wet, slow and steady, coming from the direction of the warm patch. It lasted about 10 minutes and then stopped. The next morning I swam out to the same area. The warm patch was still there, but it had moved closer to the dock, maybe 30 yards from shore now. I floated over it and looked down. I could see the bottom this time, rocky, covered in silt, and there was a shape down there. At first I thought it was a submerged log or a large rock, but the shape was too regular. It was long, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and it was pale. It wasn't moving. I dove down. I'm a strong swimmer, and the visibility was good. I got maybe 12 feet below the surface, and the shape came into focus. It was a tarp, a white tarp weighed down with rocks at the corners, covering something on the lake bed. The tarp was taut, like whatever was beneath it was pushing upward, and the warm water was coming from under it. I came up gasping and swam back to shore. I sat on the dock for a long time, shaking. I told myself it was debris, old construction material that someone had dumped. But the warmth, I couldn't explain the warmth. That evening, I called the property owner. I described what I'd seen and asked if there was any construction debris in the lake. She said no. She said her husband used to maintain the lake bed, and there was nothing out there. I asked about her husband, and she said he'd passed 2 years ago. I asked how. She paused and said he drowned in the lake. His body was recovered near the far shore. She asked me why I was asking, and I said no reason. That night, I couldn't sleep. At around 2 a.m., I went to the window that faced the lake. The moon was nearly full. I could see the water clearly. The surface near the dock was disturbed, small ripples expanding outward in concentric circles from the spot where the warm patch had been. And then I saw something break the surface, just barely. A pale shape curved, rising about an inch above the water and then sinking back down. It happened 3 times. Slow, deliberate, like something was testing whether it was being watched. I backed away from the window. I didn't turn on any lights. In the morning, I went to the dock with a long pole and tried to reach the area where I'd seen the tarp. The water was too deep, but the pole came back warm to the touch. The last detail is the one that made me leave. I was packing my car, and I walked down to the dock one final time. The tarp was gone. I could see the bottom clearly now, rocky and bare, but there was an impression in the silt, the shape of something large, something that had been lying there for a long time and had recently gotten up. The silt was still settling, clouding the water in a slow, spreading plume. Whatever had been under that tarp wasn't there anymore, and the water around the dock was warm. I drove home and called the state police from a rest stop. They said without evidence of a crime, there was nothing they could do. I asked them to send a dive team. They declined. I still think about the property owner's husband, the one who drowned, whose body was found near the far shore. I wonder if he was really found at all. I wonder what's in that lake, and I wonder if the warm water has moved closer to the house by now.
And that's where tonight's file closes, but the archives are far from empty. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover more horrors, mysteries, and true crimes hidden in the horror archives. Until next time, keep the lights low, keep listening, because you never know what story we'll uncover next.